at the presidential election process. I'm going to give you an overview, and then I'm going to go back and talk about each of these steps. We start on election day. Ballots got to come in by a certain time. Counties do their counting. Secretary of State certifies the statewide results. Yay. Governor certifies the electors. The electors, who are the electors? The electors vote. Who are these electors who are voting? Then in January 3rd, we get a new Congress. On January 6th, those electors, we're going to talk about, their votes actually get counted. And then 2 weeks later, we have an inauguration. There you go. Let's start. Election day. Election day, of course, has already begun. About 20 million ballots have already been sent in by mail or by early voting. Election day is the day by which everyone has to be registered and has to have voted. Voting ends in almost every state at 8 p.m. Local time in that state. So think of election day as the day we stop voting, not that the election process ends. This year, I think you should expect there will be disruption at polling places. His clarion call, or Mr. Trump's clarion call to stand by and to invite an army of poll watchers to come to the polls is causing conniptions for election officials around the country. Running an election requires a fair amount of cooperation and peace. You need to let people get into the polling place. You need to let them vote. But there are ways to disrupt that. We just saw it in Virginia, where a group of people, apparently Trump supporters based on their regalia and so forth, went to an early polling location and were yelling, screaming, blocking the entrance, doing everything they could to get in the way to intimidate people. There's also ways to do it on the inside of the polling place. Poll watchers are a feature of American elections and always have been. The campaigns can designate specific people for a specific precinct. The names and their bona fides go to the local election officials, and then you're allowed to go into the polling place to observe the process, because we are a country that loves transparency and the voting process is open. Those poll watchers can also look for irregularities. They can look for people who simply can't vote. They can look for people who don't have it. People who, oh my God, my ballot, I marked the wrong thing. Can I get a new ballot? You know, that kind of stuff. But they can also challenge a voter. And the Republicans have done this for many, many years. Well, they will actually challenge somebody's bona fides for voting. They cannot actually talk to the voter or physically impede them in any way. They're supposed to talk only to the election officials who are there, and they get on the phone and they talk to the campaign lawyers and say, hey, we got this problem here, yet we don't have enough ballots. They ran out, things like that. But intimidation and targeting voters is something that we're probably going to hear about around the country in certain precincts. If you needed any proof of that, you can go back to the 1960, 62, and 64 elections in Arizona, where a young lawyer by the name of William Rehnquist, fresh out of law school, working for the Republicans, was assigned poll watching duty, and he went down to the polls in an urban area, and he challenged every Latinx person trying to vote, as well as the few number of Black people who were there trying to vote. He challenged every single one of them. The effect of that is it does several things. You may knock someone up, but probably not. But what you will do is you will discourage people. It can be intimidating, and it will also slow the process down, leading that person with the two little kids who's got to go home for dinner to go, I'm not going to go in there. The lines are too damn long. So discouraging voting is the name of the game here. By the way, for those of you who don't know, William Rehnquist later became the Chief Justice of the United States. But it's been going on forever. It was actually banned for about 35 years by a federal court out of New Jersey when the Republicans in I believe it was the 1980 gubernatorial race there sent armed men wearing fake badges, you know, the Election Integrity Project, to circle around outside the polling place. And they did other things as well, but that was the one that got people's attention, and a federal court entered an order. And the Republicans could not do poll watching activities without being permitted by the court ahead of time. That was in place for 35 years. It was dissolved in 2018. and a Trump campaign operative in an incautious moment was caught on tape in Wisconsin saying, "We're going on offense this year, guys." Normally, it's always the Republicans who are suppressing the vote, but guess what? We're going into overdrive this time, specifically because it's been allowed. So watch for disruptions on Election Day. That's going to be a lot of anecdotal stuff. There are also going to be some unofficial poll watchers who show up, thinking it's their duty to come down and protect the election from whom I don't know. They may be armed in open carry states, but I don't know that that's going to do it. There are something like 10,000 places to vote in the United States if everything is up and running. So I can't predict how that's going to affect the vote in any particular place. And not to put too fine a point on it, since so many Democratic votes are going to be cast by mail, this will be a less effective strategy than it has been in the past. All right, Election Day ends. 8 o'clock, you close it. But the mail ballots still come in, because in every state, you are allowed to cast your mail ballot up to the day of the election. You just got to make sure you get a postmark on it, or you drop it off the polling place. So they trickle in for a couple of days. The different states have different deadlines. Most of them are 3 days. So to be by November 6th, that's when you stop accepting ballots. Some places they give you a week. In certain circumstances, people who are overseas or in the military have a slightly longer deadline. It appears that interference here, we're not going to be sure, but the new Postmaster General clearly made it his mission to slow the mail down, simply in the knowledge it would result in more ballots not getting in by the deadline. He professes that he has now come to reason on this and he's not going to do that anymore, but we shall see. Again, the problem with both of these, disruptions, interference on Election Day, and problems with mail ballots, is we will never know. The ballots simply disappear. You're going to get anecdotal information about that. Oh, my ballot didn't get in, but it's going to be difficult to discern a pattern if you're trying to watch this stuff. And by the time you figure out the pattern, trust me, the press pack will have moved on to the next step. Counties count the ballots. I have a little tilde there because this is a process that starts on Election Day. Let's take the votes cast that day. That's fairly simple for the most part. A lot of it's electronic now, so it's very quick. They push the button, they get a result, you're done. Sometimes there are provisional ballots. A provisional ballot is somebody who, for one reason or other, believes that they are registered, but something is wrong. It is the wrong name. They forgot their ID. If it's an ID state, they may be at the wrong precinct. There's a bunch of reasons you're allowed to vote provisionally. You do it that day, it goes in a separate box, and then they check to see what was wrong and either cure it or it doesn't vote. And then there are the mail ballots. The mail ballots in most states can be what's called pre-processed. Pre-processed means they check the signature, they check that stuff, they open up the envelope, they pull out the security envelope, they flatten the ballot, and they get it all ready to be counted, but they do not count it in most places. Most places allow the mail ballots to be counted starting on Election Day. But as I mentioned, it's going to go on for a while in different places. But we're going to see a fair number of vote tallies include some of the mail ballots, but it's entirely random who gets counted ahead of time and who doesn't. It is true the earlier your vote is in, the more likely you'll be voted by that day. The counting process, like the casting of the votes, is a public process. They can have people in there watching the votes being counted, watching the mail ballots being opened, checking the signature. So there can be a Republican and a Democratic operative literally looking over the shoulder of the person as they're doing it and checking it, and they can challenge it. That signature is not right. Oh, no, the person is registered as Thomas Williams, and this one's signed by Tom Williams, so it might not be correct. Oh, the signature is different. Well, the signature is 40 years old, but they can challenge the signature. If anything is missing, anything, the internal envelope isn't sealed. Those are all bases to challenge those votes. And absolutely will expect that Republicans will be doing so in urban counties, particularly in Pennsylvania and Florida. This is where things began to go off the rails in Florida in 2000. Now, in that case, they had already done the count and had begun to certify the results, and Mr. Bush was given a 527 vote lead. However, because it was so close, they were doing a recount, and a recount is normally done by hand, and that's where things got nasty. Two strategies, legal and non-legal. The legal strategy is stop the count. That is the goal. You don't want to invalidate anything. You simply want to stop the count, because as more ballots come in and more are counted, you've got the blue shift, and they were concerned about it. So they were in court doing everything they could to stop the recount. And of course, eventually, the United States Supreme Court stepped in and said, stop the recount. The lesson from that is you're not in there necessarily. So yes, you're invalidating individual votes in that kind of retail way, one by one. But what you really want to do is stop the recount and stop them wholesale. And that's going to take a court order or the passage of time. We'll get to that in a moment. So you interfere with that as much as you can. That's the legal way to do it. You go to court, you try to get orders to stop recounts. You challenge the way they are done. It will all be about ballot integrity, fraud, due process, equal protection, and other wonderful grand concepts that may not make legal sense. The goal is to slow it down. There's another way to slow it down. You physically slow it down. I'm not sure how many of you remember, but in Florida, 20 years ago, in Miami-Dade, they were doing the recount in the county election officials building, and they kept going. They wouldn't stop. And so an army of people showed up, suspiciously well-dressed for a riot, and had a riot inside to stop the count. They literally drove the counters out of the room, and they had to retire to another place. It is referred to as the Brooks Brothers riot because it appears it was all paralegals and lawyers from the Republican Party who otherwise weren't busy in court. And there is bipartisan agreement that that worked. That worked to slow down the recount in Miami-Dade. So you can, and this year, I'm afraid it's not going to be lawyers. It ain't going to be a bunch of people looking like me. It's going to be my Second Amendment friends who are going to show up to try to disrupt counts because they're going to claim that the counts are fraudulent. The counties begin to certify their results as soon as they feel they've got them done. They send them to the state. California, for instance, has 58 counties. There'll be 58 county certifications. And sent into the Secretary of State. Secretary of State then tallies them all up sometime in the first week of December normally, so when we see the actual certified results. Now the calendar gets really, really important, guys. So now you've had your votes, we've had the counties count them, we've had the challenges, they tried to slow it down, things got to the Secretary of State, and now we have to start paying attention to the calendar. Because this is the point in which, I'm sorry to tell you, you as voters begin to not matter anymore. Because once the state has certified the results, the Secretary of State, who has won, which candidate for president has won in that state, the certification goes to the governor. The governor then certifies the electors. And here is where we need to learn about the Electoral College. Well, I'm not going to get into whether it's a good idea, bad idea, it's a vestige of slavery, or anything like that. I'm just going to tell you how it works. I got to back up. I was surprised how people don't know any of this. The Electoral College consists, there's two numbers you need to know, 538 and 270. And 538 is not just a great website, it's actually an important number. 538 is the number of electors. These are the people who actually vote for president. When you go on November 3rd or put in your mail, you are not voting for president. We thank you for your advisory idea, but you are not actually voting for president. The electors will. There are 538 of them because the Constitution says that each state gets a number of electors equal to the number of House members plus their 2 senators. So there's 435 members of the House distributed around the states. Every state has 2 senators, that's 100. That gets you to 535. And then there's a constitutional amendment that gives the District of Columbia, which is not a state, 3 electoral votes. That's how you get to 538. It's that simple, just arithmetic. Every state but 2 allocate their electors following the election according to the results of the voters. And it's winner take all. So if Biden gets 1 more vote in California than Mr. Trump, all 55 of California's electors will go to him. What we have are competing slates. You guys don't know about this. This all happened back in the summer. Each campaign designated a slate of electors who are absolutely loyal to cast their vote the way they're supposed to. And now, according to the Supreme Court, they have to. So there's 2 slates behind all this stuff that you guys don't see. But when you push the button for whoever your perceived candidate is, you're actually voting for a slate of electors, 55 of them in California. The governor, taking the certification results from the Secretary of State, then certifies those electors. I put a date in here of December 8th. December 8th is very important. If the electors have been certified by the governor on or before December 8th, then their votes are deemed conclusive when they get to Congress and are opened and read. They're no longer subject to challenge. However, if the slate of electors has not been designated by December 8th, it is open to challenge in the Congress, which may or may not allow them. I need to dwell on this for just a second. This is really important. There is a body of law that suggests that the legislators of the state can, if they choose, not nominate, designate the electors themselves. That's because the Constitution itself says that every state gets these electors who shall be determined as the legislature decides. They can just decide however they want to do it. Now, in all 50 states, they do it based on the election results. So one of the things you should expect to see is if things are not going the way Mr. Trump wishes, he will try to prevent the certification of the electors through lawsuits or other mechanisms. Second, in 6 of the battleground states, the legislative houses of both houses are controlled by Republicans, including Wisconsin, Michigan, Florida, Pennsylvania, and others. There's already open talk that if the vote did not go the right way, to slow it down, remember the word fraud? Call it fraudulent, it's illegitimate, and prevent the Secretary of State from certifying the results, or if they certify, prevent the governor from certifying the electors. And therefore, the legislature must step in because the election has failed. And then the legislator directly appoints. They completely discard the result of the votes, and they appoint. It almost happened in Florida in 2000. They were 1 day away of doing that. When the Supreme Court ruled, Gore conceded, and they backed down. But they were 1 day away from the Florida legislature appointing. Watch for this one. This is how someone can, quote, steal an election. You simply discard the votes and you do it directly yourself. All right, assuming we have a slate, or, oh no, how about this? The votes are done, Secretary of State certifies, gives it to the Gov certifies the electors and appoints them, and the legislature steps in and says, oh, not so fast. We're appointing the electors this time. You could have 2 slates of electors out of a state. It's happened before. Not since 1876, but it has happened. The next important date is the 14th. This, guys, is the actual election for the president. It happens on December 14th this year. It's a Monday. That's when the electors actually sit down and cast the votes for president. They gather in each of the states, in the capitals of the 50 states, and they cast their votes. Next thing that happens, on January 3rd, there's a brand new Congress. Yay! They get sworn in, they get their pictures taken, and so forth. Great. They then adjourn, and they come back because the big day is January 6th. That's when the electors' votes from each of the 50 states literally have been hand carried to Washington. They're given to the president of the Senate. And I'm sure all of you know the president of the Senate is also the vice president, Mr. Pence. And in the presence of both houses, he opens all the envelopes alphabetically and reads the results. They can be challenged. If one member of each house jointly signs a challenge, it will be challenged. If there are competing electors, they'll be challenged. That challenge, it is not clear how that challenge gets resolved. Does the vice president do it as the president and presiding officer? Or does each house do it? But what if the houses disagree? This is where you need to start paying attention to the Senate races. If the Republicans maintain control of the Senate and the House is assumed to stay in the Democrats' hand, you would have differing results, and the result could be that a state is nullified. The state's votes are simply not counted. It's happened before. But once you've taken all the votes of all the people who were not challenged and accepted that are actually counted, you then, remember 270? 270 is simply 536 divided by 2 plus 1. So you don't have a tie. 270 is what you need to get to. If either candidate gets to their 270, they have been elected president and vice president. If state delegations are disqualified, it could make it impossible for either one to get there, because it's the number of electors appointed, not the number who vote. So you still need to get 270. So knocking out a state effectively knocks that state out of the race. And if it's a large state like Pennsylvania or Florida, it could prevent somebody from getting to 270. Then it really gets ugly. At that point, believe me, you as voters have nothing to do with the election. The election has failed in legal terms. And then it goes to the floor of the House of Representatives. The floor of the House votes for president. The floor of the Senate votes for vice president. In the House, the vote for president is not done by members, it's done by states. That is, each state gets a single vote. So what you want to ask is, which party controls that delegation? As of today, right now, 26 states have Republican delegations in the majority, 22 states have Democratic, and 2 are split. But it's going to be the new Congress. So if you really want to drill down on this, you need to start paying attention to House races in Pennsylvania, Florida, Michigan, and Iowa. That's where delegations might flip. Nancy Pelosi is working very, very hard right now to try to reduce the 26 to no more than 25 delegations in the Republican hands, because the way it's just simple arithmetic. Whoever wants to be president has to get to 26 states. And on the Senate side, we're going to have to see what the new Senate is. If Republicans hold, then it's going to be Pence. If the Democrats hold, well, then it'll be Harris. And of course, if it's tied, guess who casts the deciding vote? Mr. Pence will elect himself as the vice president. And by the way, the tickets no longer matter either. You can have one person from each party. It's happened before. So that's a quick run through of an election and all the different steps and processes. We did want to leave time for questions, David. I think I did it. If you want to get a hold of the lengthy 30 pages with 10 pages of endnotes, it's available on that website, www.thefirsamendment.org, all spelled out, /resources. All right.